everybody. Thank you again for joining us for Digging Deep webinars. I'm Lacey, and I'm the Community Manager for Shadow's Edge, a product of the Digging Deep project, as well as the webinar organizer for Digging Deep. And I'm here today with Shani Thornton. She's a certified child life specialist. She also runs the popular website and blog childlifemommy.com. She actually has joined us in the past for a webinar we did a few months ago about how to help kids and teens grieve. And we are actually covering a different topic today, but first I'll let Shani introduce herself and tell us a little bit more about what she does as a child life specialist.
Thank you so much, Lacey, for having me back again. I appreciate just being able to reconnect and give you guys some good information. So as she said, I'm Shani Thornton. I've been a certified child life specialist for nearly 15 years now. I worked in a hospital-based setting for a while, and then I eventually moved into a community base. I saw a very large gap in service to support children and families within the community. And so I started doing work there, created Child Life Mommy, that blog and website, to just provide some good resources and information to other caregivers, students, child life specialists, and other professionals. And eventually it turned into a private practice. So I've been doing that for probably 6-ish years. I started in the New York area. I'm now relocated into Northern California. And essentially child life and private practice is pretty similar to child life work within the hospital setting. I don't have an office, so I go into families' homes and provide support to them. And it's all the same type of stuff. I'm doing preparation and education on an illness, preparing them for medical procedures or dental procedures, supporting children of adult patients, or if they have a sibling or a loved one. Incorporating therapeutic play and creative arts. I do a lot of sibling support. I work with a hospice agency that I contract with. So I'll get referrals to work with either their pediatric hospice patients or, again, children of adult patients. There's a very large gap in service there. And then do a lot of grief work. And obviously with COVID, as many of us child life specialists and other similar professionals, we're trying to pivot and support others who are coping with this. So I've been doing a lot of work around COVID.
And we definitely need more people doing that right now in this time, because COVID's brought out every emotion of grief and stress in adults and kids. So
yeah, absolutely. So like I said, it was very similar to child life within the hospital, a lot of prep and education. So you can see, on the screen, it's, preparing them for, a new transition, right? That's kind of what we're gonna be talking about today. So hospitalization, medical diagnosis, a relocation, a new sibling, all of that stuff is gonna be a new experience or a different experience for them if they're in a new development. So it's preparing them for it and using different types of interventions of therapeutic play and creative arts, children's books, and really kind of just rehearsing with them and helping them build a stronger coping skill set to work with it.
I love that. Like someday I want to see how you do it without, of course, breaking any HIPAA violations, but it's completely fascinating what you do in your line of work. So today we're actually covering, last time Shani was with us, we covered dealing with grief and loss and how to help kids and teens through that. Today we're actually talking about specifically getting through life transitions, whether it be, changing schools, moving, or even changing family dynamics, after divorce, because it's inevitable that kids and adults are going to face life transitions throughout life. It's just how to help kids be prepared for it or how to cope once the transition hits. So let's start off with this question. What are typical life transitions that a child or teen may face?
So there's, in general, with our life's journey, we're constantly changing and growing, and there's transitions that are involved. So common ones that we're going to see are, the return of school and the end of school. That's also a big transition. As a parent, we know how important it is for kids to have a schedule, structure, and routine. So anytime that's shifted or changed, even with the start of school, there's a lot of anxiety, but also truly the end of school year. My kids always struggle with the end of school going into summer because they're like, well, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, okay, let's take a pause. We do this every year. Um, but again, it's any type of that change. The others is, sports. So when kids are starting a new sport or that sport is shifting to to a different season, if they're getting involved with different activities, they're going to have to adjust to new people who are on their team or new people within their group, new coaches or teachers, new schedules. Those are all new routines that they're going to have to get adjusted to, which is part of that transition. Obviously, too, as your family grows, new children, new siblings are going to be added. That's a big change. Illness. So, as child life specialists, we know how much illness or a medical trauma or an accident can really change and have a ripple effect for not just that person who's, it affects primarily, but it's impacting their entire family. So the siblings, the core group of the family, and then kind of ripples out from there to extended family, the community, and obviously a death, right? So that's a huge change and an adjustment to the transitions. Divorce, separation, deployment, anytime a caregiver or a loved one is separated, that's going to bring up all those different emotions. And that's part of that transitional period of trying to adjust to it. And then obviously relocation's another big one of going into a new move, whether it's within the same community or for like my family, we moved completely cross country. With transitions and the normalcy of it, obviously with the pandemic, it's really heightened a lot of different emotions with it. And we saw last year with school how much that was impacted, and that the majority of kids were going online or doing distance learning. This year, things have changed. At least in our community, we are all back in person 5 days a week, full time, no distance learning options. But with that, it causes a lot of anxiety for everybody involved because, again, it's that transition of back to school, but school is still going to look a little different than it did a couple years prior because last year was totally different. And there's, different emotions and opinions that we're seeing right now with the masks, and either they're mandated or they're optional. Obviously, with the Delta variant, there's a lot of fear and anxiety with that. And there's a lot of questions and concerns with the vaccine. So with all of those emotions on the transition back to school or any type of routine, it's all heightened because of the pandemic. And just truly, like, again, we are going through the unknown. When it comes to transitions, that's probably the hardest part because we're trying to get settled to feel the normalcy and the routine of it. And when you don't know what's going to happen next, and that's what causes more fear, more worry.
Yeah, it's especially like even just adults, like for transitions, we at least, can inform ourselves on what's going on and everything. But like little kids, like imagine the transition being when they're still too young to understand a lot of what we're talking about. So it's just heightened so much. So my next question for you is, what are some common reactions you might see in a child or a teen during a major life transition? And would you label any of those common reaction as a good or bad reaction, or healthy, not healthy?
Sorry, I muted myself. So there's a lot of common reactions with transitions, right? The first thing it's going to do, it's going to bring up all those feelings. And it's not always negative, right? Sometimes we immediately go to like the anxiety, the worry, the fears, but it can bring up a lot of excitement. It could bring up a lot of, looking forward to something, the curiosity of a change. But some of those other emotions that are really kind of challenging to deal with, especially if your baseline is a little bit more on the anxious side, it's just fueling it. So your anxiety is going to be higher, your worries and your fears. You just might feel really overwhelmed with that. And so that's what we see anytime there's a change in a transition, is the emotional piece. When it comes to kids and teens, sometimes they're just not as articulate, right? They're not just going to come out and say how they're feeling. And even for adults, we do the same thing. It comes out in our behavior, it comes out in our actions. And that's what we see with kids as well. So they might be having a really hard time self-regulating their feelings. So they might be a little bit more hyper. They might be more agitated. Um, they could be a little bit mean and snarky, especially to their core family members who we're really like the ones who are always going to be there to protect them, so they feel, the most comfortable to kind of let it out on us. It can impact, sleep. There could be some regression with their sleep. For preschoolers, it could be, or toddlers, it could be for toilet training. Eating can be impacted. You can see kids and teens become really angry, or really withdrawn. And obviously, like I said, it could raise the anxiety and also cause just kind of chaos within the family, right? So more fighting, more agitation with one another. And really, some of the things that you're going to want to watch for is that even using the tools that you're using, and even taking from the stuff that we'll be talking about today, if you're still seeing, kids and teens they just can't get back down to a baseline, they can't control any of those really big strong emotions, and they become very withdrawn or incredibly anxious, where it's actually impacting their daily life, that's when you're going to need to go ahead and seek, some more professional help. But there are ways to support kids and teens with this through the transitions.
Okay. And that point you made about eating and sleeping habits being affected, I know we didn't talk about this before, but could you expand on that a little bit? Because I know that might be hard to recognize immediately.
So typically we'll see, this happens with adults as well, is nighttime and sleep is where you're going to see it first, is trying to settle down and getting into bed. You might have your child coming out of their room over and over and over again, or they want you to be in the bed with them, or they need another story, or they need you to lay with them until they fall asleep. Those are all signs that their body and their mind cannot get to a full relaxation. Like they're having a hard time self-soothing because they're thinking, and they've got these worries, and they've got all of these big emotions that are kind of coming on. And that happens all the time at nighttime. As soon as you lay down is when the activity around us and the distractions around us have stopped. It's when we have to be quiet and lay there. Well, your mind is still going. So that's sleep is kind of where you see it. Eating too is, I see it with myself, that when I'm having a little bit more of an anxious period of time, I have a really hard time eating. I have a really hard time just like getting my meals down. I just become nauseous with it. And I have made that connection, right? So you start to understand, okay, I feel the anxiety in my stomach. I can physically feel it, and I'm having a hard time eating. So when we become aware of like eating and sleeping, those are great ways to educate, the kids and the teens about making that correlation between, do you see what's happening right now? Or do you see that we're preparing for a big change and transition? And I'm noticing that it's impacting you physically. Let's go over that. Like, where are you feeling it within your body? What can we do to cope with it?
Thank you so much for covering that. It was just, you made the point earlier, and I can, as someone who used to watch kids a lot, I remember it was kind of hard to recognize, because then it's like when a kid's coming in and out of the room, sometimes it's like maybe they're just excited to, at the end of the day, spend time with family, but it's also good to know when to recognize that maybe it's a sign that, something's going on with them internally to pay attention to.
Absolutely. And these are ways to help kids cope and manage those big transitions. So the first thing that we're going to do is we want to make sure that we're honest with our kids. We know this in child life. You can't say to your child, like, you're going to get to go to a birthday party, but really you're taking them in for surgery. Like, we have to be honest with kids. With really hard topics and things that we feel like they're going to have a terrible reaction to, or they're not going to be able to handle. We don't give kids enough credit. They actually can handle a lot. But it needs to come from their caregivers first, of, maybe rehearsing what you're going to say first, maybe talking to somebody and figuring out the language that you're going to use so that the child and the teen developmentally can understand it. But honesty has to be the foundation. If your kids can't trust you, who are they going to trust? So that is the key to helping prepare them for any type of change. So if you're going to move, if your loved one's going to be deployed, if you're going to be separated from your spouse, and you're going through a divorce, you don't hide it. You've got to come up with a plan, and you've got to talk to your kids about it. And we know that when you prepare children for transitions, it helps us to ease that anxiety, because again, they're going to know what to expect. So giving them a plan, giving it in really concrete language, using visuals of, what's going to happen first, second, and third, giving them a role and a job, and giving lots of opportunities to make choices. What choices can they have if they're moving? Like, we can't bring all of your items. You can choose your, this or this. What would you like to do with the items that we can't use? Do you want to give them to your friends in the neighborhood? Do you want to donate them? Like, anything where you can give them some power and control is going to help their emotions on this transition. And obviously, we know that we have to be a good role model, right? We have to have the positive outlook, and you got to be optimistic even when things are really tough, because your kids and your teens are going to pick up on that. As soon as they figure out that you're not positive about it and you're negative, they're going to do the same thing. They're going to mirror it. So it's okay to say, that this is hard and this is a struggle and this wasn't our choice and we have to do this. However, we're going to try to make the best effort in making this a positive experience. So there's always like a spin on it. And the other piece to this is making sure that you're validating those emotions. So just like how I was saying, this is hard, I'm naming it. And you want to validate, your children's and your teens and the kids that you're working with, and validate that feeling first, instead of coming in with a problem solving solution or kind of dismissing it like it's not a big deal, because to them it is a huge deal. And that's the key that we often forget, is we forget to kind of just validate that emotion first. And then the last piece to really prepping them is to get in the rehearsal of it, right? And to practice that. What is that new experience is going to be? And that's definitely going to help. But transitions are still going to be tough. When we relocated from New York to California, I had been preparing my kids for a long time. They knew that this was going to happen. We had a lot of things in the works. And I knew that coming here, it was still going to heighten their anxiety. They still had to adjust to everything. And so it took us some time, and they needed some additional support and help. But I knew that eventually with our anxiety, we're going to come back down to a baseline. So even with all the practice and the prep, it still can come up, and it can still surge, but it's eventually going to come back down, especially if you have some tools involved to support them.
And that's a really good transition to our next question of, with the anxiety that transition can cause for kids, do you have any books and activities that you would suggest for families and caregivers to use as tools?
I do. I love books. Oh, there it is. Sorry. I love books. I incorporate them all the time. These are some of my favorites that I use for separation. So again, this can be, relocation, divorce, deployment, incarceration. Anytime you're separated from your loved one, there's fantastic activities that can go along with pretty much any book. Like there's usually things you can Pinterest and you can search for, but honestly, you can read a children's book and you're like, how can I turn this into an activity? There's multiple ways. The Kissing Hand is a classic that people have been using to help kids with the transition, typically back to school. But truly, you can use it for anything. It's about separation. And there's always activities to go along with that. The Invisible String is a classic. I use that one all the time. where, you have them create their own invisible string, and you have them tug on the string, and you remind them that anytime you're far away from your loved one, all you have to do is tug that string, and it reminds you that you're still connected to one another. Another great book that I love is called Parents Get Divorced. This is created, it's right in the middle. This one was created from Sarah Ulsher and at Mighty and Bright. So she's created children's books that really kind of focus on the transitions and the change. And she's created a reusable sticker schedule that can go with it. So it gives that visual part to kids. It talks about the changes that are happening. And then it gives you the kids the options of like where I'm going to be at for Monday, whose house I'm going to be at for Tuesday. She does this she has a regular transitional book. She does it with cancer and illness. So check her site out because I use that one a lot. And some of the other favorites, like, the preschool age group, the Llama Llama Mrs. Mom. I love that one. The Day You Began is about going back to school. Any books where it's really about emotions, you can help kind of really reconnect using any of these activities.
And it's also good to note that, just like what you said earlier, kids are more resilient than we credit them to be. So like, I know a lot of parents might feel a little nervous about bringing out these books. Like, this is some tough subjects in a kid's book, but again, that helps them understand on their own terms what they're going through. So, and again, like, of course, preview a book to see if you are comfortable showing it to your child, but like all the books that Shani recommends, I fully trust for sure. But it, like, again, kids are more resilient than we sometimes credit them for. So these books just put it into words. Yeah.
And it keeps the metaphor, it's safe for kids, just like in play is safe for them. You're in the metaphor of play. In books, it's the same thing. So it's not a direct, like, let's talk about what's going to happen. It's in the metaphor, like, oh, look, this kid's going to a new school too. Like this family's, looks a little different too. They're getting their families being separated, or it's divorced or whatever. So it's relatable to kids, and it's really safe for them to go there. It protects their ego, and it helps. Usually all of these books will have some coping skills in there, which is fantastic. But I love, Lacey, that you said always preview the books before you just like open it up for your kids, because sometimes it might bring some triggers up that aren't appropriate, or it's just not developmentally appropriate for your kids. So always,
because every kid's unique and has different needs, and you would know your child better than an author who's never met your kid.
Absolutely.
But and I know you also have you were saying you have activities that you like to go with these books, kind of like the picture schedule that goes with the Parents Get Divorced book. Could you cover more about those therapeutic activities that you would suggest to help ease those struggles of transition? And I saw you had it broken up by age group. I would love to talk about that next.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do. So I incorporate a lot of different activities by developmental age group to help kids cope with change and transition. So for the toddlers and preschoolers, they're going to be more into the play, right? It's going to be all dramatic play, getting on the floor with them, and working through what that transition is going to be. So for instance, I have a client who is coping with grief and loss, but she's also going to be a sibling, or have a new sibling very soon. So we're preparing to get her ready for the baby. And so there's a lot of play right now about taking care of the baby and talking about like what happens when the baby cries, and what does that mean, and what is your role in it? What can you do as the big sister, and what is that experience going to be like? Where are they going to sleep? Where are they going to eat? Just going over the rehearsal of the change, but it's all through play. When we play with kids, especially this age, this is when they are at their best, right? They have the biggest imaginations, they have the most control, and they get to be the boss. And I love incorporating more of like child-centered play. So it's getting on the floor with them and letting them lead the play. They are really the director. They tell me what to do. They tell me what role to have. And I use that opportunity too to kind of reflect and mirror what emotions they're sharing, or what emotions the dolls or whatever they're playing with is sharing, because that will help kind of, again, normalize emotions, validate feelings. It builds their vocabulary for feelings. So that's a great way to also kind of just reconnect with kids, is really getting on the floor and playing with them, but letting them be the leader. I always tell the kids, I'm like, oh, you're such a great boss. Like, you're bossing me around, like in a really fun way, because as adults, we're telling them what to do all the time. And this is a great time for them to finally have a sense of control back. And when it comes to transitions, they need to find a sense of control, and they can do this through play. Another thing to think about for toddlers and preschoolers, they're really starting to learn feelings, and physically where they feel them in their body, what their reactions are to them. Do they get really explosive and angry? Do they get more sad and quiet? What are their reactions to feelings? And so I use a variety of ways to, give kids a visual of feelings. So I usually have like a feelings thermometer or different emojis of feelings, and check in with kids. And I encourage parents to, have that somewhere within their house, to have kids kind of talk about how they're feeling at that moment. And also for parents to model it. Like, right now, mommy's feeling really tired, or mommy's feeling frustrated, or whatever it is. And you show them the faces on the chart. That will help build the vocab for kids. And then when it comes to those feelings that are really big and overwhelming and hard to manage, creating more of like a coping corner or a coping calm down box, or some type of area where it's not a punishment like a timeout, but it's more of like, you're seeing them start to escalate. Let's go there and see what we can do, kind of de-escalate it and distract them and help them feel calm. So I've created calm down boxes. So you can see this in there. I usually incorporate a lot of sensory items. So Play-Doh, fidgets, like beans, any type of sensory input. When a child is starting to escalate and they start to manipulate and get focused on the sensory item, it actually starts to kind of calm the brain down. So you'll see them eventually get to a better place, where then they can do some better deep breathing, or they can look at the cards, or they can, just get to a place where they're a little bit more calm. It might not bring them down to a 1, but it can take them down to maybe a 5 from like an 8. I do a lot of different visuals in there again. So you can see like the square, that's for breathing, the triangle for breathing. There's different physical movements they can do, jumping jacks, squats, like different things like that that are fun for kids. Another activity that you can do with kids is, especially when they're starting to have a lot of fears and worries, this is the age where they have more of a magical thinking stage. They really can kind of go into places that you have to clear up the misconception for them. But I do like worry eaters for them. So the image with the 2 paper plates and that little red monster, that red monster's Flam, he's my worry eater. And his mouth is a zipper. So I open it up and the kids will draw things that upset them or scare them, and they shove it inside him, and then we close it up. But you can create your own worry eaters, paper plates, a box, any type of items you have around the house. Again, it gives like a contained space where kids can express it through art. They can tell you, you can write the words down for them, or they can draw the picture and then they can crumble it up and shove it in there. Model it for them too. Do it yourself. I'm scared of spiders, and draw it and put it in there. I did this yesterday with a bunch of preschoolers, and instead of making a worry eater, I gave them a really large poster board, and all of the kids drew on there of different things that scare them. So there were some snakes, there was some separation. I'm sad when mommy has to leave me. And they're drawing all of these things on there. And then I gave them syringe art, and they were taking paint and they were shooting it at the poster. And so it gave this physical release. It was fun. It was playful. It had sensory involvement involved in it. And it gave them a sense of empowerment over those worries. And it was fun. Um, and again, the images, you could see the one with the face. So that's again identifying how they're feeling, and just kind of helping them cope with it. And I put the Mighty and Bright, her images up there too of transitions. So that's for preschoolers.
We can provide links to Mighty and Bright as well in the follow-up email to this webinar, as well as when the recording is on YouTube, you can look in the description of the video for a link to those books.
Perfect. She's like, when I go to her stuff all the time now. I discover it and I'm like, this is amazing. So school age, same thing. So a little bit more, they can articulate things. We still need to clear up some misconceptions for them. We need to give them a sense of control, but you can do this in a lot of different ways. Games are really fun. Kids at this age love games. So I'll do therapeutic Uno, Jenga, any type of card game. And it's playing it with them. And usually when I'm playing with them is when I start to ask questions that are how things are going. Or we'll turn it into like, when you get the red card, name things that might make you angry. When you get the yellow card, what is something that you look forward to? Like, you change up the conversation and the questions to help them start to engage on how they're feeling and to express it. Other fun activities for this age group, but really for teenagers and for preschool age, volcano making. They love this. Creating the volcano, talking about how you're feeling, how it correlates to your body, how we shove those emotions down, how that's not great, and how eventually it'll either spill out in a huge explosive way where you're completely out of control, or it can kind of just come out constantly. So, giving them a way to understand it through an activity, and then identifying coping strategies to deal with it. All of these activities, it's again, the emotions, what their triggers are, how they express it, and then what are healthier outlets to start to tap into. The glitter jars are totally fun. School age kids, they love to write stories or share stories. So I have them create their own story or make a book. I incorporate, draw it out, ink about it is another one. So that is through Art with Heart. And that is more of, it's almost like a graphic novel, but it gives you a prompt of a question to think about and connect it with your emotions and then draw it out. It's fantastic. Those are great books. And we'll put the link on there for that too. Another one through Usborne, they have a series of graphic workbooks as well. So like No Worries, Hello Happy, Stay Strong, Be Brave. They've got a bunch of them. Those are great for this age group. They're colorful, they're bright, but it's not babyish. And it helps kids identify how they're feeling and gives them a way to express it. Another platform that I've been using is called GoZen. This is online. There's a subscription for it, a fee for it. If you're involved with an organization, a school, a hospital, you could probably have them chip in for it. It'll be much cheaper than doing the private way. And that's great because it goes over so many different scenarios that kids are coping with, whether it's bullying, whether it's anxiety, negative self-talk. And it literally has a curriculum of small videos that you watch, and the videos are kind of funky, I'll be honest, but the content there is really good. And then they watch the videos, and there's great worksheets that go right along with it. Or you can watch the video and you're like, I don't really like this worksheet, but I can create it into something else, just like with the stories, right? The children's books for preschoolers. You can always change and adapt to working with the kids that you're working with, because you get to know them, you understand what their likes are and their dislikes and what's going to work. So these are all great and fun for school age. Let me see. Oh, sorry. There we go. Teens. I love working with teens. They're so fun, but they really reflect, they're very similar to preschoolers, right? They're still that egocentric stage. It's all about them. They're super emotional. They're having a hard time regulating it all because they're super hormonal. But we have to validate teens as hard as it is. Like I have got one right now who's going through this and it is such a struggle, but I always kind of reset, make sure I give them a hug, make sure I tell them how much I love them. And like, let's try to do a little bit better. But with them, they have sometimes a really explosive emotions of getting their anger and their frustration out or their sadness. So I'll do activities where I'll give them a giant poster board, kind of similar to the preschoolers I did the other day, and they'll write different things that upset them. And I recently did this last week where I had a teenage gal write everything that she didn't have control over with her siblings' illness, and how much it really impacted her, the separation from her family, the isolation from her peers, that her peers didn't understand. Like she wrote it all on there. We put it up on her fence, and then I gave her a bunch of water balloons and she destroyed it. And she was really timid and shy, but I modeled for her, like picking it up and just chucking it out and screaming and getting it out. And then eventually she started doing it. And it was just, it turned into laughter and fun. And she just had that physical release. So that's a really fun activity to do with adolescents. Again, Art with Heart has created Chill and Spill and Ink About It. Those are fantastic workbooks that give you that outlet to express yourself. The Shadow's Edge, obviously, for digging deep. You guys have a phenomenal platform for teens. Other ones that you can do is you tapping into how they're currently feeling, right? They're so egocentric. It's hard for them to think about others, but they are beginning to think about like how their future might be. So I'll do a lot of activities about present time, past time, and future, whether it's a timeline or drawing like a body line of them and thinking about like what is the future going to look like for you? What do you want to see? What do you want to feel? What do you want to touch? What do you want to hear? And it really helps them start to express themselves. And it'll teach them some better coping skills and tap into all those emotions internally and how they're feeling. Mandalas are great. I've incorporated the iceberg one that a lot of us have heard about and used, that the tip of the iceberg is only the tip. We have no idea what's really underneath. And with that, I always create now like a rescue boat, right? A coping boat. What's your coping skills in there? Who are the people you trust and can go to and support you? What are things that you can do at school and manage it? And you can't get out of your desk. Like, what are you going to do? What can you do at home? Like, we really start to tap into different coping strategies because transitions are tough for teens. This is a tough time. You imagine a teenager having to move in the middle of their school year or change to another high school. Like that is really tough because it's all about their social time where they're separating from their parents, they're connecting with their peer groups. So we need to give them really supportive safe outlets to let this out and then find some strategies to cope. One of my favorites I just started doing is in the canvas. You could see it in the middle of the screen. It says the goal. I had a teenager write down everything. My French bulldog is snoring next to me. I'm so sorry. It's crazy. She wrote down everything she didn't have control over, similar to the water balloon one. And then in the middle, she found a quote that was empowering and she put in. And so on that quote, I took painter's tape and we covered it up. And then she took the syringe art and covered up all the things that she didn't have control over. And then once it dried, she took the painter's tape off. And then she has this really great canvas, gives her the empowerment. But this is like her goal. This is going to help her work through all of these difficult things and all these things around. Yes, they have happened and they're hard, but she's going to be able to overcome them. It's building her resiliency. So those are a lot of my favorite kind of go-tos right now.
It's so interesting because you had a few different ones in our last webinar. So I can see you like cycling through different activities right now. And again, I will be putting a link to our last webinar with Shani in the description of the recording of this webinar as well as in the newsletter, so you can see all of her different activities that she uses. But so, and this actually kind of ties into our last webinar about grief and how transitions can bring up feelings of grief and loss. Is this similar to triggers that can arise when kids experience a transition? And what about when they are entering a new age of development?
Yeah. So anytime there's a change, right, and a transition, even if it's a transition that they're used to, it's once they're in a new development, they really have to reprocess it. So we see this a lot with when there's an illness, there's a chronic illness a child might be diagnosed with, or a loved one that's diagnosed with. When you educate them on it, say at preschool age, you're going to have to really re-educate them again when they hit school age, when they become a tween, when they become a teenager. You're going to have to re-educate the same information, but in a developmentally appropriate way for them. But we see this with, the emotions that pop up with grief and loss. And it's kind of like Pandora's box. It will just start to open up, and it can just kind of, things can spill out. So we see this when a family is hit with a loss, they start to go back to the previous losses and they start to almost reprocess those again. And then it's like this double whammy for them. So it's really important to just give them that safe space to identify, validate those emotions, express them, and then realize that it's all the madness of feeling overwhelmed will eventually kind of come back down again. It'll cycle back up. I mean, that's just how our emotions work. But the stronger and the healthier coping skills that you have, that you can go to regularly, the easier it's going to be to manage it. And so you're not going to go so high with anxiety or fear or sadness. Maybe it's a little bit lower, or maybe it's not going to last as high.
And kind of back to how like grief can kind of need to be reapproached at each development stage. Like, let's say a child experienced loss of a loved one or just a life transition, and they need to reapproach dealing with that as they hit like teen years. Like, I know this kind of goes back to what we were talking about, eat and sleep. Like, could that affect their eat and sleep years later, like when they hit that development stage, like where you could see like teenagers doom scrolling until 3 a.m. on social media, or potentially eating disorders from stress, things like that? Could that potentially happen because of something that happened many years ago?
It could be, especially if it's not addressed, right? So that's why it's important, anytime there's these stressors in our lives, that we are addressing them, that we're not kind of just pushing them to the side, that we're hitting them head on, we're talking about them, we're processing them in the way that's healthy for that child or the teen, so that they can manage them. It still could come back up years later, but then, reminding them of the coping tools that they have to go down, to calm it back down. The one thing that if you start to see them really struggling, right, that it becomes really serious and they become really withdrawn, or they're isolating themselves from their friends, or their, you see a change in their intake of food, and body image issues, then that's when you need to seek professional help, and just realize that it's really normal too. Like, this happens, right? We know that our mental wellness is key. I feel like we're in a different place this generation, that we're just much more open to it, about getting support and talking about it and sharing and normalizing it, and that there's nothing wrong with that. And, people get depressed. People have some really big struggles, but there are some phenomenal resources out there to help them, so they don't have to feel alone or isolated or shamed by it.
Thank you so much for covering that. I know it's kind of a heavy topic to bring up things when it's like later down the road, but it does help to talk about it and because ultimately it's just like that volcano activity. You put that baking soda in, and finally when the vinegar hits, it's everywhere.
Right.
And so I just wanted to see, like, do you have some things that could be helpful reminders for parents and caregivers when working with kids and teens? Like, what are your what are things to keep in mind based on everything we've talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one big thing to do is we need to reset, right? Kind of having that pause. Like I already shared too. I'm doing that with my own teenager, like, a little reset, like have a little bit more self-awareness on my reaction to him and his reaction to me. How can we reconnect as a family? That is key, right? Having that time together. So whether it's going for a short walk, playing a card game, listening to their favorite music in their room, getting on the floor and playing with them, like spending that quality time together is huge, and it doesn't have to be quantity. We don't have to do this all day long. It's those little snippets of time that are going to help both parties feel reconnected and more calm and more understanding of one another, so that when you hit the next obstacle, um, there's going to be it's just going to be a little bit easier. If we're completely disconnected, it's not really going to work. The other thing to keep in mind is, we talk about this all the time, is the self-care. Like we have to take care of ourselves in order to be a better parent or a caregiver, a professional in this field, like whatever that means, whether it's 5 minutes to ourselves, drinking a cup of coffee, setting boundaries. It's okay to say no to things. You don't have to say yes to everything. If people are offering help, like, hey, I can pick up your kids after school. Usually super parents were always like, no, 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 I got it. Like, I'm going to go pick them up. And then I have to run to the gas station. I have to, where I was like, no, no, I got it. It's okay. If someone says like, can I help? Yeah. Oh my God, that would be amazing. Then I'm not going to be all agitated in the car with them screaming at my kids. So, the boundaries are important, asking for help. But I think the biggest piece, the biggest takeaway you can do is always to kind of reevaluate, right? Reassess yourself, like check with yourself, like having more self-awareness is the biggest thing. I make mistakes every day. But I promise you, every single day when I make those mistakes, I sit there and I'm like, oh, how could I have made that better? I'm going to give myself a little bit of credit, but the more I become aware of it, the less of that same mistake I'm going to make. And I know I feel better as a mom. Um, I feel better as a wife, as a friend, that I'm putting in the work to grow um, and just to be a better human being, have to be more kind.
Without, like, of course, negative self-talk, because I've met plenty of people who go like, I'm just a crappy mom. It's like, no, you're doing your best. You're still learning, because like no one's got this down 100%. So
No.
but in the self-care thing, it's so important to fuel your emotional and comfort needs so that you can be who you need to be for your loved ones. Like you can't, your car can't run on empty, and neither can you. So this is your reminder to go give yourself a spa day, moms and dads.
I haven't had one of those in a long time. I can't find it, just being able to go out for a walk for 10 minutes. I'm like, oh, as long as it's not super smoky here.
So I would love to, unless you have any other points you would love to bring up, Shani, I would love to open up for questions to the audience. And Angie wanted to say on here in the comments, great insights and practical applications. Thank you. So thank you, Angie, for the comment.
Thank you.
Are there any questions from the audience? Because we have about 10 minutes left. If we don't have any questions, we can just maybe cover like just anything we've missed. So I'll keep an eye on the chat box if anyone has one. Oh, we've got one. Okay. So Shani, where do you get your referrals? Any advice on making those relationships with different services?
Yes. So I get my referrals from various places. Took me a while to build my practice. So this is like the number one question for a child life specialist in private practice. Like, how does it work? It's not overnight. It's not even in a year. It takes a while to really educate your community on the services that you provide, finding the gap in service within your community, and then finding ways that you can support them by staying within the scope of child life. And that's probably the key, is making sure you're staying in your lane. So I get referrals now from pediatricians, from pediatric dentists, from funeral coordinators and directors. I get referrals a lot from word of mouth now. Start to work with a few families, it starts to spread. So community organizations that I've connected with, church groups, schools, like it's starting to just, now it's just in a variety of different places. And then what was the second part of the question?
Let me see. It was, any advice on making those relationships with different services?
My advice would be to put your best foot forward. Know that it takes time to build relationships and to network and to build that trust, making sure that you're finding the right organizations or the right person within that organization, because that's really key, because it might be somebody else within the organization who needs to give you the referral. So it's connecting with that person. And then I think just, being vulnerable. You have to be brave and get out there and do it. And you can't just, they're not going to come find you. You have to put yourself out there. But the key to it always is to stay within the scope of child life and to not go outside of that. So I will get a lot of referrals that are not within my scope of service. I am not a counselor. I'm not a social worker. I am not a therapist. And I'm very, very clear and transparent with the families and the organizations that I work with, that this is my scope. This is my expertise. This is what I can provide. Once it goes out of that, I have a ton of people or organizations that I can refer you out to. And those organizations too will refer to me. So I've had other therapists, other counselors, where either they just can't take on that client, or it's not within their scope, or they are all maxed out, that they'll pass me that referral. So it's a mutual thing back and forth.
And I have another question from Hannah. How do you charge and bill for your services as a private practice?
So it really depends on, so there's no bill code for child life, right? We're a free service within a hospital or an organization. So I'm fee for service. So I have a step fee that I have created that works within my community's needs. So that really changes on the fee, because, I will get emails from somebody all the way in like Missouri or in Texas. And I'm like, I don't know what your cost of living is out there. I don't know what people are charging and what the expenses are. So you really have to kind of educate and learn that within your own community first, to then figure it out for you. But you have to calculate all of your time too. So my time of creating whatever I'm going to create with that family, driving to their home, all my supplies, if I have to get childcare, all of that's calculated into figuring out what my fee for service is going to be. And then what was the second part?
That was it for that one. Well, we've got a really nice note from Angie here for you. If you want to read that. And, I'm kind of starting to wonder if, because we have so many child life specialists following our saga with Shani, I guess we could call it. Well, maybe we should host a webinar of just like how to switch to private practice. Like,
it's a big topic, I think, especially now. I saw it going into a big topic a few years ago, but I think with COVID and with the impact of not having enough jobs, or people are just in a different type of transitional state, experience wise, that they've done the hospital thing for a long time. They loved it, but it doesn't work for their life anymore. Maybe they have children. Maybe there's a huge need within their community that they want to serve. And so you start to transition. I mean, that's the best thing about our profession, is that we have to be flexible, and we know transition so well. You have to be able to cope with it. So you can adjust and adapt to a lot of different settings.
I love that. Just because I know, like, you obviously have like a natural drive to serve children. So talking about serving the need in your community is, I imagine it's just kind of a recurring thing in the child life specialist field too. And I love that so much.
The
So
gap in service will never be filled. I'll put it that way. It's never going to be filled. There's always going to be work because you can always adjust it to anything. Working with children and families going through family type of life crisis, I should say. It's going to be there. Something's going to happen. There's going to be a natural disaster, or somebody's going to get sick, or there's going to be a death. Like, it's always going to happen. That's life.
exactly. So we have about 3 minutes left, and if anyone has any final questions, please pop them in. And on a final note, while we wait to see if there are any more questions, I want to ask, it might be kind of silly, but what is your self-care tip for child life specialists this week? For me, this week, it's cook your favorite meal just for yourself.
Oh, that's
yeah. Like, you have a favorite you have a favorite soup, but the kids are like, no, I don't like mushrooms, but you really want mushroom soup. Make yourself some mushroom soup this week.
You know what I do? I kind of get back at my kids is like, I'll go in the pantry and I'll get a cookie and I'll be like, oh, I'm gonna eat this. And one of those parents is like,
that's your little self-care.
It's my little thing. I guess my tip would be, if you can do 5 minutes of some outside walk, run, just sitting there in the sun, something outside in nature, and just being quiet and like listening to the birds, smelling the air, whatever it is, feel grounded being outside for 5 minutes. I'm in California, it's covered in smoke right now, but today
that would work.
A little bit of a blue sky, so I'll take it.
Oh, because you have wildfires in California right now, right?
It's out of control. I feel like our whole state's on fire. So
I am also on the West Coast, so we are also dealing with that here. But so that self-care tip would be great, whether you're a child life specialist and you've had to, work with some heavy cases lately, and you're just like, you've absorbed that emotion from the kids and their families, or if you're a mom and you're like, man, we'll call the kid Billy. Billy's been acting out all day. I'm gonna go get a cookie from them.
I'm gonna get a cookie from the pantry and I'm gonna sit outside and listen to the birds.
Well, thank you so much, Shani. It was wonderful as always. And thank you so much for everyone who attended today. I will be sending out either tomorrow or the day after the link to the recording. So if you want to rewatch it, or someone who could benefit from this information, you can have it in your hands, as well as there will be links to some of the books we discussed and other resources. And thank you so much for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was great to be here. Hope you guys have a great week.
Have a good day, everybody.